at you with a really exciting video today. As the title mentions, we'll be covering a new series on how to win Heroscape. A lot of you are new players and some of you are, obviously more advanced players. But regardless of your skill level, we're going to be covering, it's going to be a three-part series of basic fundamental tips, advanced level tips, and then pro tips. So this video will be focusing around basic tips that newer players or just any player really should know and should have a fundamental understanding of in order to have the greatest success at winning at Heroscape. Again, it doesn't guarantee that you'll win. Obviously, it's a game of chance, and the variables are still great in any type of game with all the different units and maps that you can be on. But generally speaking, there are some themes or some specific things you can do as a player to give you a higher probability, a higher chance, a better chance of winning. And they're not just army or map dependent. They are pretty generic tips or things that you can do in your games that will give you the best chance of success. So we'll be covering those today. There'll be 10. There's going to be 10 for each of these parts. So there's 10 basic tips or principles. Same with the advanced and same with the pro tips. Before we jump into that, got a couple announcements. For those of you that are interested in participating in the ARV contest, it's a map building contest. Again, that's running up through the 8th, so it's coming up. It's only this Wednesday. We'll be closing the doors on that. Right now we have 8 great submissions so far, and I think we've got a few more coming, but would love to get some more. Some last minute submissions would be incredible. And just so that you are aware, again, a custom ARV dice set is for the winner. So this is one set type with the skull, shield, and the ARV symbol. And then the other dice option is the volcano with the glacier as the defense, and then the ARV symbol as well. So you get your choice of one of those two sets for the ARV contest winner. And we're really excited about getting the community involved in more maps that we can play test and get ready for tournaments. So I've got links in the description, so please make your way there. Or if you go to the Heroscapers homepage, it's on the front page there with all the details and links for you there. Another announcement is that we're going to be holding an online Heroscape tournament for anyone to participate. Now, originally this came from communicating with the Utah tournament directors. We were talking about, what are we going to do during this, situation where we're all having, quarantine, right? We all have to be in, it's hard for people to get together and play games, and we've had to cancel our get-togethers for tournaments every month. And, we came up with the idea, well, why don't we run an online Heroscape tournament event for the Utah monthlies? But because it's online, we can invite anyone. And so right now, I've had about 20 plus people, of my own friends and family around the US that have RSVP'd just because they're excited to be a part of a tournament that they otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to be a part of. Some of you are outside of the US that, you don't have many Heroscapers to play with. But the online format and interface, while different, is still a great way to meet new people, play on maps and with armies that you wouldn't otherwise play, because you don't have to have the figures to play with them. So it does provide an opportunity to still learn the strategy and be a part of the community. So that online Heroscape tournament is going to be happening April 25th at 10 a.m. Now we're going to be for everyone that RSVPs, we're going to be sending out instructional details and whatnot on what to expect, but it's going to be 400 point armies with a 24 hex limit, and you're going to need to register. So in the description of this video, you'll find I'm going to have a link for where you can go to register for the event, as well as a link that you'll use for a webinar. So a lot of you I know are not familiar with the online Heroscape interface. And so what we are going to do is on April 11th at 10 a.m., we're going to be holding a webinar that will be an opportunity for you to ask questions, but also be instructed on how to use the online interface, where the resources are, and what to expect for the tournament. Because there'll be a few new things that you're not used to. We're going to plan on using a Discord app. It's basically a social chat room that we can have for you to go to communicate with us on game day, as well as it provides voice chat channels. so that when you go into a game, not only will you be assigned a link with the map and your opponent, but we'll assign you a chat channel as well, so you can hook up and chat with your opponent during the game, and that'll help it go along a lot faster. So be aware of that. More details to follow, but please reach out with any questions that you have, as well as any interest, to me at my email, heroscaperforlife@gmail.com. As well, if you're looking for practice games, again, the webinar is going to be a great resource to see how to use it. But if you want to do a practice game and get used to the interface beforehand, I'm offering myself as well to that. And I'm sure some of the other Utah tournament directors might do that as well. Because there's so many people that aren't used to that interface, right? We love playing Heroscape in 3D, and I agree with you, I do too. But the online interface does provide an opportunity to meet new people and, again, try new things, right? So I'm really excited for that. We're a few weeks away from that. The event, again, I can only imagine it's going to be huge. We've got so many subscribers here on the channel. I wholeheartedly encourage all of you to, give it a shot and try it out. And let's make this a huge event. Let's make this a Heroscape collective bonding event where we can just all come together and have just a great time. So yeah, so those are the announcements for today. So enough of that. Let's jump right into the content for this video. All right, so for the 10 basic fundamental principles that you need to know about winning Heroscape, we're going to go 1 through 10, and I'm going to try and give some examples for some of them, brief explanations for others. I'll turn the video around to show maybe some examples on the board of what I'm talking about. I also want to just thank some of the people that I communicated with to get some feedback regarding these points that I came up with. This is not a solo effort. I mean, I wrote down a bunch of my own ideas for the basic, advanced, and pro tips. But I also want to recognize that some of the prominent members of the community and some of the most accepted best players in the community participated in providing some feedback for this video and the rest of the videos, the advanced and the pro tips as well. So recognize that while I am, I do have my own ideas and thoughts on these that I'm sharing, this is a bit of a collective effort. Like these ideas, these points come from some of the most competitive and universally known best players in the community that were participating in sharing some of these fundamental principles. So be excited about that. For number 1, it's simply just know your army, right? When you come to a tournament, look at the format, right? And don't just say, it's a 200-point army or whatever it is, and throw together units. Like, think about the maps, think about the units that you like to play, but more importantly, think about how the units that you want to play with work together, right? When you know your army, you should probably have some sort of synergy. Now, of course, Heroscape can just be fun, throw together any units, and I'm not necessarily talking about that, right? Casual play is when you just kind of grab units, fit them into a format, and just have some fun, right? In this video, I'm really talking about competitively, right? When we're actually trying to win, when we're trying to give ourselves the best chance of being successful in this game, in a tournament setting, or even just with our friends. I mean, if we want to win, you want to have units that have synergy, right? You want to have units that help each other on the battlefield, and understand how they help each other in the right situations. For example, if you're ever familiar with the elf wizards, it doesn't make sense really to run one elf wizard by himself, right? It's called the elf wizard pod for a very specific reason, that they synergize and buff each other so that they can have the strongest impact on the battlefield, right? Same thing with Spartacus and the gladiators, right? If you don't have Spartacus and the gladiator build, it's not that they're not going to still do well, it's just they're not going to do as well as they were designed, right? Spartacus was specifically designed as a 200-point figure to be able to be a part of that army and give them the highest chance for success. And so there's specific units that you need to recognize have very specific synergies with other units, and you need to set yourself up when you're setting up an army to be able to use those units together, right? So know your army, know the abilities, how they work together, and when you sit down to play, you shouldn't forget what those abilities are. Now, again, we all make mistakes. There's sometimes we forget our own abilities, but again, to have the most success, you should intimately know the units and their abilities and how they work on the battlefield. Another piece to that is the role that a unit plays. For example, there's specific terminology we kind of use, in that there's sharks, there's bread and butter, there's a cheerleader unit, right? And those types of units have a specific role in an army. And what you want to make sure that you understand is how those units play specifically, the way that they were designed, right? Or having a screen, right? When we talk about a screen, you typically think of rats, right? They scatter around, they lock up the board, they position themselves to create a wall for typically range that sits behind and shoots. And so you want to make sure not only that you understand the unit's abilities, but their role in an army, so that when you play them, you're playing them right. Principle number 2 is take height. Now, this is something that I see newer players kind of struggle with sometimes, is that when they have the opportunity to take height, they don't always take it. And part of that is simply because, they're still new to the game, and so they don't quite understand the implications of taking, moving position onto height. But at a very fundamental level, you should always take height when you can. It increases your chance on attack going through and killing a unit. And on defense, it gives you the advantage of getting an extra defense dice. What it also does is it denies your opponent from getting that height as well. So not only are you giving yourself the advantage, but you're denying the advantage to your opponent. So on a very fundamental, always take height with your units. So here's an example, very simple and somewhat obvious example of taking height, but still important to recognize, is that as a fundamental idea of taking height, here's something you always want to do, right? So if I go 1, 2, 3 with a Legionnaire, I'm taking height on this Hydra. Now, not only am I increasing my attack this turn, again, I'm increasing my defense, but also, as I mentioned, denying height to the Hydra. Because this is a 2 hex level here, right? This Hydra on height is going to be devastating, because he's going to have base 4 attack, but with height, he's going to have an attack of 5 times 4, that's rolling 20 dice on whoever's around him. So taking height, again, is denying the opponent taking that height. The other piece, too, is look for opportunities, subtle opportunities to get better attacks. I could very easily come in here and give the shield wall bonus to this guy and get a same level attack. Now, maybe that's the right play if you want to increase defense or try and block this Hydra in from this spot. But in my opinion, the better option here would be to use the road to run around and grab height on the Hydra here. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Now we've got 2 attacks of 4 down on a Hydra. Again, now this is very specific and situational. Hydras, have 6 defense and 4 life, and they get less attacks per every wound on their order marker. So taking this type of a move for this situation, in my opinion, is the right play, because we're trying to get those first 1 or 2 wounds on the Hydra to negate its effectiveness, right? If I can get 1 or 2 wounds, I've just halved its effectiveness and its value at this position in the game. So when you're taking height, you always want to try and find those positions that give you the best advantage. Something that's not always immediately obvious to newer players, and so that's why I'm mentioning it here. Number 3 is power glyphs. Now, power glyphs are a huge part of Heroscape. Now, some people don't play with them, but almost every tournament I've ever been to, and Gen Con especially, there's always power glyphs. Power glyphs are kind of command points, if you will, on the board. They're power points that give you an advantage, and they can have huge impact on the game, right? There's a number of power glyphs that we use. In a competitive sense, there's really only about 6, I think, that are generally accepted as competitive. You have the Dagmar glyph initiative. You have Kelda, which is the temporary glyph that's healing. You have Valda, which is movement +2. Olenavia, which is a unique attack +1. Loden, which is a d20 +1. Wanek, which is the wound glyph. And then Gerda, which is defense +1, but that's kind of debated whether or not that's really whether it's competitive, whether or not it should be in the pool for glyphs at tournaments. So Gerda is kind of the fence sitter. Some like it, some don't, but all the other glyphs are generally accepted as tournament-worthy glyphs. And so it's important to recognize when you sit down at a map in your competitive setting, what glyphs are on the board. If they're preset, that's important because the map designer had a very specific reason for doing that. So understand when it's a preset glyph, kind of the implications of that. When it's not a preset glyph and they're random glyphs, you kind of take a gamble because you don't know what they are, right? But if you know what glyphs are possibly in the pool, then it gives you an idea of whether or not you want to go for them. Glyphs, generally speaking, are something that you should go for, right? You should try and get it to get the bonus that it gives to your army. Again, on a very basic fundamental level, grab power glyphs. They give you bonuses, and do your best to command or control those locations so that you can always have that bonus for your army.
So in coordination with grabbing power glyphs, I want to mention to understand what the power glyphs do and the value that they bring. So in this example, this map has a load-in, which gives you +1 to any D20 roll. Now, this is very army specific, right? So it does give you +1 to D20 roll if you're rolling for initiative, for example. It gives you +1, so that's nice, but it's not amazing. But it's more specific to armies that actually have D20 abilities. So for example, say you're running Roman legionnaires in an army, aside from having Maburxa, there's really no reason to grab that glyph. So understanding the glyph and the power that it gives your army is absolutely essential. On the other hand, we have over here an initiative glyph, right? It gives you +8 to your initiative roll. And that's a huge bonus. It almost guarantees that you win initiative. Again, it doesn't always, obviously, but it gives you a much less risk when you're placing your order markers at the end of the round, because you can almost guarantee you're going to win it. So understanding how the glyph works is also important, because this doesn't activate until the following round. So for example, if I've got a Roman legionnaire and say it's at the beginning of the round, right, turn 1, and I move a Roman legionnaire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, say I've got Marcus Decimus Gallus, say by turn 2, say on turn 2, I go ahead and grab the glyph. It doesn't necessarily make the most sense, because the glyph isn't going to activate until the beginning of the following round. So it's still giving an opportunity for my opponent, say turn 2 or turn 3, to come in and kill me off of it before the end of my, before the round even starts. So yes, I can grab it early to try and hold it and make sure I have it. But in my experience, that lowers the effectiveness of your units, because you're placing them in a position they're not really going to be doing anything for the rest of the round if you just go grab it when it doesn't even activate till the end of the round. So typically, for something like initiative, I wait till turn 3 so that, I can go fight in the middle of the game. And then say I'm up here, I can run down 1, 2, 3, 4, grab the glyph at the end of the turn 3 and ensure that I have that bonus for the following round. So that, again, of course, is situational, because if you wait till turn 3, it's possible your opponent goes and grabs it. But that also gives you an opportunity to attack them off of it and kill them off of it before they get the bonus. So something to keep in mind, understanding how the power glyphs work so that you can make the right decision at the right time.
Number 4 is the rules of 15 and 120. And the idea here is that you never want to run less than 15 figures of a common squad. And you never want to run a hero unit or a unit that costs more than 120 points. Now, at a very basic level, the idea, again, for the most competitive setting, for a very basic fundamental, the idea here is that you need enough of a unit to make an impact on the game, right? If you only take one squad of Roman legionnaires, it's going to be tough for them to bring the full value of their unit, just one squad, right? So the idea is when you're coming into a competitive format, if you're going to be running something that you want to win and you want to have the high success of winning, you need to run at least 4 squads of a 4-man squad, or 5 squads of a 3-man squad, right? So 4 times 4, 16, 5 times 3 is 15. So you need enough of that unit in the map, in the army, to be able to have an impact throughout the entirety of the game. The other piece is that not running a hero above 120 points mitigates the risk of losing high valuable units, right? For those of you that have ever played Torkelna, the 220 point Marl Hive Lord, is he huge and fun and exciting to play with? Absolutely. You run him with a bunch of nasty little nag grubs and you can have a really fun time. but you've also probably, if you've played him, had that moment where someone snipes him, right? He gets knocked off in 2 big attacks from some beastie hero somewhere. You didn't do a good job protecting him or whatever the case is, and he goes down. And that's 220 points of your army. In a 400 or 500 point format, that's over half of your army, right? You've invested that much into that figure. You have to recognize that when he goes down, that there's not much left for you to do, right? So by limiting yourself in a competitive format to not taking any heroes or units above 120 points, again, mitigates that risk of when you lose that unit, you still have enough of whatever else you brought that you can still win the game, right? It's not a auto lose. Fundamental number 5 is don't split your order markers, right? You want to use a unit all the way up until it's about to die. A great example of this is when you have a bonding squad with maybe a potential other units, right? Sometimes when I'm playing against newer players, I'll see that they'll bring maybe 2 or 3 squads of a common squad and a hero that bonds with them, and then they'll have maybe some other heroes that they think are really cool, which is great. But what they end up doing is they end up putting maybe order marker 1 on the bonding squad and then 2 and 3 on their other cool heroes. And the problem that you have there is you never really have the right momentum, right? What you end up doing is you bring out a squad and then you leave it stationary somewhere in the map. You bring out a hero, you leave it stationary, and then the next one comes out. And the problem is you've got figures spread across the map that are what we call sleepers, right? They don't have an impact for where they are, and it gives the opponent an opportunity to knock them off, put wounds on them, take them out when you're not having turns on them. And so you want to be aware of that and try to play armies that, one, limit how much you have to split your order markers. But if you are playing an army that has units that don't bond or synergize with, combined turns, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you use a unit up until it's about to die. Another great example I can think of is Hydras. I've played against people where, they send in a Hydra on like maybe turn 1 or turn 2, and then it sleeps on turn 3. And then it gives me an opportunity to get those wounds on it. And the problem with Hydras is that as soon as they get that first or second wound, it really highly decreases their ability to be effective. And so getting that first and second wound on that Hydra is paramount when you're trying to fight against it. And so when you're kind of going all in on a unit, it gives it the highest value possible, right? With a Hydra, in my opinion, you have to put all the order markers on it when you're ready to get it engaged and get it attacking. Otherwise, you're giving an opponent an opportunity to take it out and put wounds on it without it having much of an impact. So you have to be aware that splitting order markers can set you up for a high risk when your units are sleeping and not being used. Number 6 is to learn to play with and against army cores. And what we mean by kind of the basic competitive army cores, there's a few out there. There's Rats, Raylan, Range. Typically that's a slew of 3 or 4 squads of Rats, Q9 or Krav, mixed in with Raylan. You've got heavies like ×4 or ×5 with Tornak, Narak, Ornak, any of those heroes bonding, but very typically it's like 4 or 5 squads of heavy gruts with Grimnak. Then you've got Knights and Sir Gilbert, so 4 or 5 squads of Knights, Sir Gilbert. You've got Glads and Blasts, so 3 squads of Gladiatrons, 3 squads of Blastrons, and whatever else you throw in there. Typically you have 4 or 5 squads of Stingers and Raylan. So there's a few army cores of really strong units that you want to understand how they play and how strong they are. Another one that I would throw in there is Greenscales with Nilfheim and Raylan. That's a really strong army core that's important to learn how to play against, very competitive. And so you need to get used to the melee units, typically, the high bonding melee units, high level units. It's heavies, or Roman Legionnaires, so Roman Legionnaires ×4 or 5 with me Berxa, Marcus Decimus Gallus, and then sometimes throwing in Morgrim in there as well. Those army cores kind of make up the high tier, high competitive level bonding units. And you need to understand how they work, right? Because you're going to face those a lot in high competitive scenarios. But you also need to know how to fight them, right? If you play it yourself, you need to know how they work, but you also need to know how to fight them. How do you beat that army, right? When you're faced up against 4 squads of rats, Q9 and Raylan, you know, that's really scary, right? I mean, Q9 is hands down one of the strongest units in the game range, especially when he's just sitting there by himself. Rats are single-handedly one of the best units in the game because they can lock up the board. And then Raylan is single-handedly one of the best units in the game because he gives +2 defense. I mean, who wants to get through 6 defense Rats, 9 defense Q9? Nobody does. But it is beatable, right? The best players understand how to do that. And so in order to be a best player, you need to know how to play those army cores and play against them. Number 7 is learn how to play bonding units right, specifically bonding melee. Range in Heroscape inherently has the advantage, right? If I can shoot you from 7 spaces away before you can reach me, I have an advantage, especially if I have height and I'm shooting at you before you get me. And so it becomes really difficult as a melee player, if you're melee versus range, to be able to set yourself up correctly to be able to fight an opponent. And it doesn't, and the principle I'm talking about doesn't always necessarily apply to just when you're facing range. If you're facing melee versus melee, you still have to understand how to play a melee right. You need to slow roll, right? The exception to this might be Viennock Vipers, but even then, the best Viennock Viper players I've ever seen don't use all 9 move all the way up into the middle of the map, right? They preserve some of those units only going 6 or 7 to set up for the next turn, right? Stay outside the opponent's range for that first turn and then set yourself up for the next turn. So you have to slow roll. And what I mean by that is resist the urge to rush in. A lot of newer players make the mistake of, say they have, we'll say 4 or 5 squads of Legionnaires. They have, let's say, Me Berxa and Marcus Decimus Gallus. And a newer player might send out 4 Legionnaires with Marcus in front, and they go out and they go fight. And then as those Legionnaires start to die or Marcus takes wounds, then they go back to the start zone, bring out Me Berxa with, 4 more guys, and they kind of do it in waves. And that's a problem, right? Because if I'm an opponent and I know how to play against that, what I'm doing is I'm limiting the effectiveness of that squad if I'm taking out those units without my opponent bringing up reinforcements in time. You want to make sure that when you're slow rolling the army and bringing everyone together and developing the entire army together, that you don't give up attacks, right? And what I mean by that is you need to set yourself up so that when your army's all together and you're ready to engage and ready to attack, once you start the attack phase, the reinforcements are close enough that if the frontline guys die, you can still move in the next guys to take their place and still get attacks in. And so that takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of finesse in the way that you develop out of your start zone, and it requires sometimes taking pot shots and sometimes losing a few guys. And good players will understand that regardless of you losing the first few initial guys on a few pot shots, in the end game, it's the right play, right? Slow rolling melee allows you to set yourself up to kind of move through the board and kind of control position points, maybe grab some glyphs. But more importantly, it sets you up for that once you start engaging and attacking, you can keep reinforcing the front line rather than going in waves and losing guys and losing out on attacks. So that's an important piece, is understanding
an example of what I mean by not rushing in your army and slow rolling melee. So for example, let's just say we're at a position where it's the Legionnaire's turn, and say, okay, we've got these guys over here. They've taken height with the Hydra. We know we need to take out the Hydra to lower their effectiveness. Say they, the rest of their army is kind of whatever. So I run in Marcus. Say, this is something I could do, right? Say Marcus goes here because I realize, he'll get extra defense on Shadow, and I can run in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And say I move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's just go 1, 2, 3. So what I've done here is I've moved a hero, I've moved 4 squad units, and 2 of them are getting buffed attacks. Now Marcus gives them +1 attack, so their base attack is 3. It's going to be 4 now, and that's 2 attacks of 4 up on a Hydra. Hydra has 4 life, but 7 defense because it's on height. So 6 plus 1, 7. Now, this is an example of mistakes that I've seen newer players or just less experienced players play, right? They say, Marcus is giving me 2 buffed attacks. That's great. I've got reinforcements. But the problem here is, again, you're potentially overextending the development of your units without reinforcing them. So consider this. 2 attacks up does nothing. Say the Hydra blocks it, or say you only get 1 wound, right? Hydra's turn, say the Hydra eats these guys because it's getting 5 attack versus, 3 and 4 defense. Not only that, you've left this guy off on his own. So say he gets eaten up. What you've effectively done is strung out your units without being able to replace them. You've limited your attacks to just 1 on the following turn in a worst case scenario, right? Worst case scenario was you engaged, you got 2 attacks, you didn't do wounds, or you did 1 wound, he attacks back and cleans out your front line. What do you have left? Okay, sure, I get 1 attack, but then who else is there to help out, right? These guys are all the way over here. Oh, shoot, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Crap, I can't get him in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're not in a position to assist. I mean, they are getting the defense bonus, but that's not great, right? Because the Hydra, again, the next turn can just keep attacking. And he's over here, 1, 2, 3. He comes in to help maybe the defense, but maybe you want to try and route, so you go up here or something. So this is an example where, the Legionnaire player rushed in to get buffed attacks, made those attacks, it failed, and then they didn't set themselves up to have reinforcements ready to reposition and still get max attacks. Heck, the first move only gave him 2 attacks as it was. So as you're developing your army, you need to count the spaces and be aware that when you decide to finally engage the position of an opponent, that 1, you're making sure you're getting as many attacks as possible the first time, but then 2, that if everything goes wrong and you lose units, that your front line can be replaced by reinforcements reasonably so that you can maintain maximum attacks. So this is an example, again, very situation map dependent, but a general principle that applies so importantly when you're playing Heroscape.
Number 8 is to use the X order marker effectively. Now, this comes more as you use units that don't bond or don't highly synergize, because typically when you're using a full bonding army, all order markers are on the bonding squad. You don't have to worry about the X. You're not fooling anybody, right? But when you start to use other units, right, because there's still tons of units out there that are good that don't require X order markers. Example was that Army Corps I talked about earlier, Rats, Raylan and Range. There's no bonding there, right? There's no specific synergy between those 3, but they all 3 complement each other in the way that they play. And so the X order marker actually becomes a lot more valuable in that setting because you are required to split your order markers up between those 3 units, right? And there's a specific way that you can do that to be the most effective. And the X order marker will act as a way to fake out your opponent. And so when you're playing units that don't highly synergize or don't bond, the X order marker is very important because it's going to throw off, or at least attempt to throw off, your opponent and the way that they anticipate you playing your turns. In like manner, it can also be kind of obvious where it is if you don't place it right. And so what I mean by that is if you have, say, 2 units that you've got left in the game at some point, and you put order marker 1 on the unit, and then order marker 2 on this unit, but then order marker 3 and the X on this unit, after order marker 2, your opponent doesn't have to guess where order marker 3 is, right? Now, after order marker 1, yeah, they have to guess where order marker 2 is. Is it over here or is it over here? But, and of course, this is all situational. Maybe the right move is to put 1 and 2. But my point is that the X can be really effective if you put order marker 1 on this unit, order marker 2 on this unit. Because then what you've done is you've forced your opponent to try and decide where number 3 is. And they don't know because the 3 and the X are still unrevealed on 2 separate units. And so that's just a very basic scenario that I found myself in at the end of games when I've got, say, 2 units left and both are in a good position to be used. And I split my order markers so that my opponent doesn't know and has to really guess where that turn is, right? If 1 and 2 are on one order mark on one unit over here, and it's pretty obvious where the other one is. The other way to use it, probably the more effective way, would actually be to do 1, 2, the X over here, and then the 3 over here if you wanted to use this unit on turn 3. Because what that does is then it makes your opponent think, okay, did he go all in on this unit? And so maybe they attack this unit, take it out, but then you actually have turn 3 left on this unit over here. So the X order marker can be really effective if used right. And so understanding how to use that when you've got units that don't have synergy or don't bond is actually a very important part of Heroscape. Number 9 is maximize your movement and the way that you develop your units. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to show an example.
This example of maximizing your movement. Again, I'm going to talk about in mid-game as you're moving through the map to go attack or develop units, but also early game when you're developing out of your start zone. So start zone. So let's assume, for example, that this is the beginning of the game and these are the only units in your start zone. Some, I wouldn't call them mistakes, but some players will take a unit like this and say they want to get them onto road. Some players will go, okay, well, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I got him onto the road piece. But Legionnaires, when they have Marcus in their army, have 5 move, right? So essentially what we've done is we've limited his movement. Right now, you could go here, but if you wanted to move here so that he could get the road bonus the next turn to start, moving through the map, then really what you should be doing is using the maximum movement of the units that you have in your army. So the better option would actually be to develop this guy and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What that does is it accomplishes the same exact thing that you originally wanted, but it's using a unit that was farther away. It's maximizing and developing that unit to its full potential. Now what that does is that allows you this unit to go farther in some other way. So maybe now you realize, oh, actually I do want him to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way over here. So you have to understand when you're developing units to try and accomplish try to do what you want to accomplish using the maximum movement of your units. And a lot of new players will make that mistake, or rather, again, not necessarily it's a mistake, but will not do that, right? They'll use this guy to go 1, 2, 3, 4. They'll use this guy to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now what that's done is it's actually limited you because you could have gotten that extra space here. This guy could have gotten there. This guy could have gotten all the way over here. So you've net moved yourself -1, right, in your full potential. So consider that as you're moving through the map, you want to maximize your movement with your units, again, depending on the situation. Another example of this I'm going to show is using units that your opponent might not necessarily expect you to use. For example, a great way to do this is what I call a bump, right? A glyph bump. The idea here is that you've got units that you grab glyphs and hold power glyphs. And for whatever reason, I've seen a lot of newer players, once they grab a glyph with a unit, they just leave it there and they don't use it. They just kind of let it sit there and hold the glyph, and it's like it's forgotten. And that unit is very active, right? Not only is it currently giving you the bonus, but it's usually at a mid or forward position on the map that it actually gives you a lot of versatility in what you can do. For example, if I want to attack this Hydra and I've got Marcus that I just moved up, I can do a couple things, right? I can say, okay, well, this guy, I'm going to move here. This guy, I'm going to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. I've got him engaged. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. Okay. So right here, I set myself up for 3 attacks on the Hydra. But what is a better situation here? This guy, sure, he was close, but what's the better option? I've got a guy on a glyph that can come in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and not only get an attack, the same attack that this guy would have gotten, but now this guy's giving him the buff, the defense buff that Legionnaires get. And not only that, now I have 4 guys that are within striking distance if that Hydra takes wounds and can only kill maybe 2 or 3 of them the following turn. So not a great example of having guys for reinforcements. This is just an example of movement, right? Because say Hydra kills them all and I have no reinforcements. So that's not my point, though. My point in this situation is strictly that I can use a glyph holder to move in and grab it. Now, if I still wanted this buff, then I can replace with this unit, right? So I am giving up an attack, right? Because I could potentially move him around and go get an attack. Well, 1, 2, 3. No, he can't get around. But if I wanted to, I could have, right? I could have moved this guy in and then this guy off the glyph to get 4 attacks. So that's possible, right? But if, say, I wanted to make sure I get this glyph bonus, say it is movement or defense or initiative or Wannick even, a glyph bump is a really cool way to maximize movement, get the attack, increase position here, and still get the bonus by taking a guy that wasn't developed and having him grab the glyph in the place of the guy that ran and jumped to do something over here. So again, maximizing movement, using glyph holders as a way to grab better position is also a key part of maximizing that movement.
The final point, number 10, is play with good players. And if, obviously there are players that aren't, used to the game, or maybe there aren't players that are very good that you play with, that doesn't really matter as long as you're playing with a variety of players. So from a competitive sense, what I mean is, playing with people on online Heroscape or people in your tournament community that have played the game a lot or have succeeded really well in tournament play teaches you a lot about the game and how to view the board the right way, how to use a unit in a certain situation. And you learn a lot online when you play with people because you get to see people from all over the world play very different ways, and it's really exciting. And so for those of you that are out there that are trying to be a little bit more competitive or trying to understand how to win Heroscape, I would encourage you to get online where you can have a community of people to play with in a different setting where you might not otherwise have that opportunity with people in your area. So I encourage you to play with good players, play with successful players, play with a variety of players, because even people that aren't very successful can still teach you new things about the game because of the way that they view it differently, right? And success isn't always necessarily determined in wins either, right? Some newer players can show up with really strong units and win games, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes even less successful players can still have a lot to teach you about the game because they view it in a different way. And that's what's so crazy and cool about Heroscape is the depth of knowledge, the depth of play style and gameplay is so different for everyone and it's so different for every unit and every map. And so it changes. And so you learn a lot by playing with a variety of different people. Specifically, you learn a lot when you play with good players. So from a competitive sense, play with good players. So that's what I have for you guys today. Hopefully that wasn't too boring listening to 10 different points of how to win Heroscape. Again, it's not a in-depth battle video. It's obviously not the most engaging type of video, but hopefully it was enough that you gained some points and some thoughts about how you can play Heroscape on a more fundamentally sound, competitively sound basis. And so next time you play a game, next time you go to a tournament, think about some of the things I talked about today and try and implement those and apply those to the way that you play Heroscape. And I can guarantee you it'll at least help you play more aware of yourself and the way that you play units in certain situations. Can't promise you're going to win every game, but I can promise it will help your gameplay as you try to apply some of these principles. So thank you guys, really appreciate it. Of course, any comments that you have about anything that you feel could be added to this is great. And if you think there's anything I missed, feel free to let me know. We always love hearing comments. Again, shout out for the ARV contest closing this Wednesday, and a shout out again for the online tournament. Go into the description here, register yourself, and stay tuned for additional details. Other than that, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.